the Maasai. This African tribe, known for their tall, fierce young warriors and their regular training diet of milk and blood, dominates southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. Until as recently as the 1980s, it was unlikely a Westerner or even someone from another African tribe would be befriended by a Maasai. It was a closed culture, especially to white people. Just to the north of Maasai land is Kisii County, where one of the teams from Maranatha's Summer Family Project to Kenya was building several one-day churches. This is one of 7 they have built in 7 days. In addition to the largest standing steel structure at the Gitari Academy campus. The team is being led by Peter Thomas, who has deep roots in this region. When Peter learned there was an opportunity to build a school and one-day churches in the area where his family had served and where he was born, he made a few phone calls. Peter's father Fred has passed away, but his mother Jean, his brothers Fred and John, and many of Jean's grandchildren all came to Kenya for the family project. The other attraction for the Thomas family was building churches for the Maasai tribe, who, when Peter was a boy, were not friendly to Seventh-day Adventists. For more than 20 years after the Thomases left Kenya into the 1980s, it is said there was only one Maasai pastor and family in Kenya. When the Thomases returned this summer, they learned there is a new chapter in the story of the Maasai. To see a church being built in the heart of Maasai country, to see the Maasai eagerly awaiting the completion of their new church, and celebrating in song, is awe-inspiring.
Good morning, YG. We are going to take a trip halfway around the world. And we are excited to have the family, one of our families in the congregation, talk about the impact that they had and subsequently the ministry of the gospel going forward in a mighty way. Many of you may know Jean Thomas. Jean and her husband Fred were called to Kenya many years ago, almost 6 decades ago. So Jean, I want you to start by telling us, what was the call like to go to Kenya when you and Fred received it in the late 1940s?
It was in 1956 that we went there. There was political unrest at the time, just like we have the Democrats and Republicans and the independents. Here in Kenya, it's tribal. There are many tribes in Kenya, and some tribes are peaceful people, some are not peaceful. And we went to an area where the people accepted the gospel very readily. But right next to us were the Maasai people who were very warlike. Their young men all had to go for training to learn how to use a spear. And they went to a special place. And when they graduated, they had to take their spear and single-handedly kill a lion. That made them qualify as a young man. So, because the Kisii people where we were working had accepted the gospel very readily, my husband decided that it would be good to try and reach out to the Maasai. So he talked to the doctors at the hospital and he said, why don't we go once a month and hold a clinic down on the border between Kisii country and the Maasai at a place called Kilgoris. So for a few weeks, for a few months actually, they went once a month and held a clinic there. And then the Maasai chief heard about this and he put a stop to it. His name was Mafuta. He went to the district commissioner and said, I don't want these missionaries to come here anymore. Well, sometime later, my husband was down at the hospital and he saw this Maasai chief down in another tribal area. And he thought it was strange, so he went and talked to him and said, Mafuta, you are Maasai and you're down here in Luo country at our hospital. What are you doing here? And so Mafuta said, well, I got very sick and I went to the government hospital. They couldn't help me. I went to the Catholic hospital. They couldn't help me. So my wives, in desperation, they said, why don't you go down there to that other tribal area and go down to the hospital there? And he says, now I've been healed. Now you can come and bring a clinic to Kilgoris. Well, about that time we left. And we didn't hear any more from there until now.
So let's fast forward to now. Unfortunately, Fred passed away about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And what prompted you guys to go back to Kenya, especially to this area?
Well, we said to our Arlington church here and our friends, instead of sending flowers to a memorial service here in this church, rather make a donation to Maranatha and maybe we would get enough money to put up a church or two in the Kisii area where we used to work 60 years ago. And 2 or 3 months ago, our son Peter, who's a board member of Maranatha, he got a message from Maranatha to say, we've got enough money, we're making plans for you to go on a family mission trip to Kenya. And they sent a list of churches that were requesting, places where they wanted churches. And I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw this list, and there was Kilgoris, the place where we'd been kicked out 60 years ago. They were now asking for 3 churches in that district.
3 churches
yes.
in this place where, when you were there the last time 60 years ago ministering, they said, we don't want you here, get out.
Yes.
And now they wanted 3 churches. So when you get to Kenya, and you're in the process of building the church, did you see anybody that was familiar or anybody that you knew from your time there, or relatives of people that you knew from your time there?
On that Friday, the first day of the mission trip, while I was standing there watching our steel team put up the building, I met Mafuta's grandson. That Mafuta, the chief that kicked us out, this was his grandson, and he verified the story. And beside him was a Maasai pastor, a qualified, trained Maasai pastor. They no longer had spears. I didn't see one spear this time when we were in Kenya. They all had a stick that they carried, but no spears. Totally changed. And from the video you saw how happy they were when we were there. The Maasai pastor pointed out and he said, you see all in those hills over there, there are Sabbath school groups all over there. Tomorrow we're going to come and we're going to have a great celebration here at this place.
So talk to me about the blanket. What does this blanket represent?
We were all initiated. They told me on Friday, they said, when you come tomorrow, we're going to give you each a blanket and you become a Maasai.
So let me get this straight. So this tribe that 60 years ago, when you were first there, said, we want nothing to do with you, stay out of our tribal area, they were inducting you into their tribe.
And I couldn't believe on Sabbath morning when our buses rolled up, the Maasai choirs were all there singing, as you saw in the video, and each one of us, 120 of us, each got a blanket. I don't know where they got the money from, whether they sold all their cattle or what they did. But every one of us got a blanket.
So you're all honorary members of the Maasai tribe.
I was given the jewelry that they wear and everything. Yeah.
So you understand, right? 60 years ago, Gene and Fred were told, we don't want nothing to do with you. Stay out of our way. Stay out of our land. And now, 60 years later, they're a part of the Maasai tribe. Now I'm curious. What were the conditions when you were in Kenya 60 years ago? When you and Fred were there, what were conditions like? Were you in a mission home? Were you?
We lived in a nice mission home up on the side of the hill. And when we got back now, we knew that house had burned down. But the big church that my husband had built was still there.
It's still there. And people
Yeah.
were still meeting in
Yeah.
that church every Sabbath morning, praising and worshiping
Yes,
God.
when we went in, the choir was practicing for the next Sabbath, and we sang with them as they practiced that afternoon.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, something special also happened in that area, and that was your son Peter was born there.
Yeah, Peter was born there at the hospital where my footer went for his treatment. And
So, and I heard you got a chance to get back to see that, to see the area where he was born.
yes, a group of us, Kay Cherry and my niece and another friend and me, we were taken down to see the hospital. The men were all too busy putting up churches.
So, describe for me, as you stood there that Sabbath morning, thinking back to the 6 decades ago that you ministered there, and you saw the work that the Holy Spirit had done, that others had done, kind of built on the shoulders of you and Fred. What was going through your mind?
I was almost overwhelmed. I just wanted to cry the whole day because I could never imagine that God could do such a wonderful thing in that part of the country. It was absolutely amazing to see the change that had taken place in those people. And part of it was due to the money that some of you had given for the Memorial Fund, and I'm very grateful for that.
What was it like for you to have your son, your 2 grandchildren, their spouses with you as you experienced this?
Well, 3 of my sons were there.
Yeah, that's right.
It was just a wonderful experience, and they need to tell you what it was like to be there.
I didn't even prompt her for that segue, but that's a great segue. I want to invite Peter, Jean's son, to come on up. Peter's son, Aaron, and his wife, Grace. And Brandon Peters, Allison. It took me a second Allison and Brandon. Allison is Peter and Ellen's daughter as well. They all went on the trip. Y'all went on the trip, obviously got inducted. So Peter, from your perspective, what was it like to go back to this place where literally you had your beginnings?
Well, it's pretty hard to describe the experience, as you can imagine. I didn't remember living there because we left when I was 3, so I don't really have any memories of the place, but as a result of my involvement with Maranatha, I've traveled back in the area, into Kenya many times in the last 3 or 4 years, but I'd never gotten back there. Arriving back in Kisii, which it's a town, plus an area. The town, I think, when we lived there, when I lived there as a young boy, was
One street.
Yeah, one street, just a small old town out in the middle of nowhere. Today it's a city of probably 500,000 people.
Oh, wow.
And just people everywhere, as you can imagine, in a third world country. The interesting part was, and my grandparents were there years before my parents went there, so both my grandparents and my parents were very influential in spreading the word of God in Kisii. Now you go there, and it's like every time you turn a corner, there's an Adventist church. They are everywhere, wow. And they say that 1 in 4 people there are Adventists.
You said 1 in 4.
1 in 4. So it's, you could walk up to a total stranger on the street, and chances are they're an Adventist.
Wow.
And
that's worse than Keene.
Yeah, exactly. So it was amazing to go back and see what had happened actually in Kisii town. But then when we went, most of the churches that we built, we called bush churches. They literally are out in the middle of nowhere. Some, we had to carry the parts of the churches 1/4 of a mile to the church site to go into those areas and be able to build those churches and see the reaction of those people. Many of them, they've been praying for these churches for years and years and years. And they had no idea that we were coming, the Maranatha, the local Maranatha guys had gone out in advance and set some foundations in different areas, but there was no schedule as to when those churches were going to be built. So we would arrive with a truck and a bus and begin to assemble these churches, and we would do them in 4 to 5 hours. As the day wore on, more and more people would come around. The word got out in the village that their church was being built. So by the time the church was built, we had a big crowd. They were all celebrating, as you can imagine. The only way they have to thank you there is to feed you.
Oh, man.
So,
what a rough way to be thanked.
Of course, the avocados are about this big around, so it was a no-brainer that a lot of us joined in. On the one side, a man walked across carrying a chicken. I told my live chicken, I told my daughter, well, there's lunch. And so it's just a great time. I mean, to watch these people and how they just respond to that building that's been built for them was just incredible.
Now, I'm curious, Aaron. Obviously, you grew up hearing stories about your dad's time there, your grandparents' time. What was it like for you to be there after hearing all of these stories and actually standing and seeing the response that y'all got as you were building these churches?
Yeah, it was pretty unique. Growing up, I always heard Kindu Bay. That's where my dad was born, the hospital, and I could kind of point to it on a map growing up, but even still, I was pretty unaware of where it was or what it looked like and what the area was like. So going there, it actually blew away my expectations. I mean, my dad told me that it was going to be, the weather was going to be really nice, elevation's really high, and I was like, there's no way we're going to get to be out in an area that beautiful and honestly that nice of weather. But sure enough, it was a beautiful, beautiful place, and very cool just to go back and see this area where my family had lived for so many years. And as my grandma mentioned, going back to the church that my grandpa built, and they lived on that compound there, and kind of walking through the yard that I know my dad played on with my uncles, and my grandma kept talking about the Cassie dirt and how red it was when we were growing up. She'd always talk about that, and we got to see how red the dirt was, and so it was a really unique experience to be able to go back and kind of put a picture to the stories that I've heard, and just as far as the landscape goes. I mean but when it goes deeper, I think there's a lot more that we got to experience being there as well.
Sure. Now, Brandon and Grace, you guys married into this amazing family. You got to go on the trip. What was your perspective as adopted members of the Thomas family, seeing the legacy that was left behind?
Well, it was really cool. My grandfather was a missionary, so I kind of had an idea as to what kind of work goes into this and the sacrifices the family has to make for this to happen. But to be able to go back there and see the things that Grandma Jean and Grandpa Fred did, and to see that now unfolding and taking, really expanding, and these people giving their hearts to Christ, it's really kind of surreal. So it's cool. It's fun to be a part of.
Awesome.
It was actually really emotional the first Sabbath we were there, because of all the stories that Grandma and Grandpa told us growing up. It was especially the Mafuta story we heard numerous times, and to be able to see 300 plus Maasai people worshiping on Sabbath, it made us all emotional just to be able to witness this and see it actually unfold in front of us, when even Grandma had no idea that this was going to be happening. And so we all got to experience this together, and it was almost like, Grace and I've talked about it a lot, where it's almost like watching a movie unfold, but after reading the book. So it's almost like you get to visualize everything you maybe have heard or just seen in your own imagination, and now it's coming to life in front of you. And multiple times throughout that trip, we were just overcome with emotion and just super grateful and blessed to be there and to be able to see how much work God has done there.
And now you were all given a stick instead of a spear.
Exactly. Although the spear would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. You would have had to kill a lion, though, too. So, that's...
I mean, no.
You have to buy the spears now.
You have to buy the spear.
And they've all killed a lion.
They figured out economy. So I'm kind of curious, Peter, as you think, what is the legacy that your parents have left behind?
Well, the interesting part, my mother's family left Scotland in 1860, to go to South Africa as missionaries. My father's parents, my grandparents, left England in 1926 to go to northern Kenya, where my grandfather established a printing press, built some mission stations and helped build a hospital. You know, of course, my dad was born there. His three brothers were born there. I was born there. So the legacy has been going on for many years. And it's actually very humbling to go back. I'm very blessed to be able to, it's in my blood, obviously, as it's now in my kids' blood, but I've gotten very involved with Maranatha International lately, and in 3 weeks from today, in fact, I'll be in northern Kenya, up on the Somalia border, checking out building sites for more schools. And just a brief plug for Maranatha.
Sure.
I don't know how many of you know Maranatha Volunteers International, but it's a self-supporting nonprofit organization affiliated with the Adventist Church. Gets no funding from anywhere except donations. The neat part of it is you can take a trip like we went on, where you donate to a cause, you go and you can actually build that structure. And this year we will build $17 million worth of structures. That's 3,500 structures, schools, churches, water wells, all over the world. So it's absolutely a life-changing experience. I've got some witnesses that sit down in the crowd here with us. Charles and Jim Lastine went with me last year to Kenya. I think Charles has been on 3 trips now.
And Kenny, thanks you for taking him out of town that
Yeah,
much.
I'm sure,
so.
yeah. And Jim's been on 2, and so it just absolutely a life-changing experience. But being able to mold that in with, that's where I'm from, even though I don't talk like it or look like it, is just, I can't tell you how great that feels.
What about you guys? As you looked at the legacy and have had now a couple of months to reflect on it, to think about what you experienced, because I'm sure being there, it was just kind of 80 miles an hour, we got to get this up, really didn't have a whole lot of time to reflect. But as you guys have reflected as grandchildren and grandchildren-in-laws, what's been your reflection experience?
Okay, fine.
Either one.
So,
Make sure we can hear you, Grace. Yeah, there you go.
okay. So, I did reflect a lot. I didn't know anything about building. I don't consider myself a handy person at all. And so, I kind of had more time to reflect, I think, as I was learning to become involved in building the structure. And as I would look around at what everyone else was doing, and as I was doing that, I realized we were in the middle of the bush. There wasn't functional roads at times. I mean, at one point I slipped in the mud while carrying parts because it was so slippery. There really weren't great roads. And it made me reflect if, now in modern times, how this environment looks like. I can't imagine 60 years ago when Grandpa and Grandma were there, how did they get around? Like all these questions started pouring in. And then at dinner time, I would ask, or I'd try to reflect on what Grandpa Thomas would tell me when he was alive. And it just made me think of all the sacrifice and really, I don't even know I was describing how with Aaron, it's almost like no one gave them praise for all the sacrifice. And I think that's the biggest legacy that I've learned from this family, that it's not praise that you're looking for, it's everyday commitment to become involved, to touch other people's lives the way you think God would want you to. So that's kind of the piece that I think we're trying to figure out, as part of this family, how do we continue that legacy of serving others without expecting any praise or a good job? Because Grandpa Thomas has no idea, right now, his involvement and how it touched so many lives. So I think that would be our piece in it.
Sure. Brandon, anything? Go. No, please. Before Brandon shares, think about 4 generations of missionaries in one way or another, whether it be full-time missionaries, your parents, Fred's parents, you guys, now missionaries literally going around the world building, not full-time, but literally taking time off, weeks at a time, to go and build and to bless. That's legacy. That is the heart of mission. Brandon, what again is the really the newest member of the Thomas clan? What was your perspective as you kind of reflect?
That Peter was a tough boss. But
Probably knew that
but
before,
I think that for me, I mean, the legacy. I don't know. It's tough to put into words. It's an honor to be part of that, and it's kind of something that you don't want to tarnish. It's something that you want to respect and uphold. But as far as the trip goes, I think it was really cool to see how, Christians from all over the country, or even, I mean, we had some from Australia and from all over. Different skill sets, different ages, but it didn't matter. I mean, you could swing a hammer or cook or, administer medication. And it's like a functioning body of Christ. And so we're all kind of working together for one main goal, but at the same time doing different things.
Awesome.
So I need to tell you a funny story about Grace. I don't think she had any idea what she was actually marrying into, because Aaron's literally taken her all over the world. And so I apologize to Grace's mom every time I see her. I'm sorry that we've done this to your daughter, but I stood in amazement 4 years ago or so. We were in southern Africa at Victoria Falls, and they have a bridge across the river that's 500 feet down to the river, and of course they bungee and do all kinds of things of it. She got into the bungee swing with Aaron and jumped off that bridge.
Wow.
And it was one of the most amazing things to watch, because I just, on our way down, I thought to myself, I'm going to have to apologize to her mother again.
She's going to have to work through it in therapy.
Yeah.
Gene, I'm going to give you kind of the last word. And here's two questions I want you to share with us. One is, you and Fred literally served around the world, many different places. What makes your time in Kenya so special?
Well, what makes it special is that to go back and see the difference that there's been, especially in the Maasai culture. The Kisii people were already Christian. They accepted the gospel very readily. But to go back and see the dramatic change that there's been in the Maasai culture has just been an astounding thing for me. It's an absolute miracle of God.
It is. Seeing the Holy Spirit working through you guys. And I'm sure there were some times when you were there that you wondered, what in the world are we doing here? Are we making any kind of forward progress? Especially when you're told by the chief of the Maasai,
Don't come back.
don't come back.
No. Well, when we get to heaven, I hope that we can meet Maasai, the Mafuta, the chief. I'm hoping that he became an Adventist, but I don't know. But his grandson definitely is an Adventist.
Last question.
Yes.
So we're sitting here. Obviously, Peter put in a plug for Maranatha. I know we as a church have partnered with them over the last couple of years with our mission trips through Revive. Obviously, a number of our community members have gone with Maranatha. But let's say we're sitting here and someone says, oh man, I can't go on a mission trip, or I can't go as a missionary full-time somewhere else. As someone who is really seeing the hand of God work all over the world, if someone says, Gene, help me understand, as someone who is a part of this community, how I can be a missionary here in Arlington or here in Fort Worth or here in North Texas, what would you tell us?
Well, I think the Arlington Church does have a ministry, feeding the homeless, or what. I think the young people do go down and feed the homeless. I was thinking about this question. I think we can share it right in our community with our neighbors, just telling them about our beliefs in God. I don't know what else to say. I try to do it in my neighborhood.
Sure.
And I think all of us try to do it in our various ways. Now, Aaron has been asked to go out and do a video of the well drilling. Is that right?
Potentially,
yeah. Hoping to target non-Adventists who will be willing to donate to drilling a well where they wouldn't be willing to donate to a church or a school.
Okay.
So there are many ways that I just don't know. Everyone has to share his faith as he sees best, and God will bless us.
Did you catch that? You don't have to travel to Kenya. God called Fred and Jean many years ago to make an impact in Kenya that to this day, the fruit is almost unbelievable to see how the Holy Spirit used them and subsequent people that came behind them on their shoulders to build the work in Kenya. But it doesn't have to be in Kenya. It can be right here in our community, doing it in our own way, doing it with our own gifts. And we can leave a legacy the same as the Thomas family did. Our time's coming to an end. Aaron, you had?
Yeah, I was just going to add a little bit to that.
Sure.
Go back to the legacy part. Where when I look at my grandparents, I heard all the stories growing up, obviously, and I grew up with them, living with them for a lot of years. And the biggest thing I saw from them was that they were constantly serving other people. And that was here, that was in our church, that was in our community around our house. And my grandma, even to this day, still does Meals on Wheels to give meals to, I mean, she drives herself sometimes to go deliver meals to people, and she's 90 next month. And my grandpa, even before he passed away, he was still, they were always serving. And so to me, that's what this legacy is. And now watching my dad going on multiple trips a year to be a part of Maranatha the way he is, that's to me the legacy that has been passed down is this idea of serving. And it doesn't matter where you are or who it's for or whatever. It's just this idea of giving yourself to others, because that's what God has called us to do. And to me, I think that can be done no matter where you are in the world. And I've seen it with my grandparents. They've done it in Africa. They've done it in many parts. And now they've been doing it here in Texas. And even to this day, I see my grandma doing that on a constant basis, always looking to help someone, and never looking for anything in return.
Guys, I wish we had more time. I could spend hours talking. I mean, it is interesting. I'm going to tell a quick personal story. The first time I met Fred Thomas was when I was in the 4th grade. He was the Pennsylvania Conference president, where I was a member. And I can still remember, I don't remember much of his administration there, but I do remember when he came to Johnstown, my home church, he talked funny. He didn't talk like he was from Pennsylvania. So it was cool to be able to come to this congregation, to be able to reconnect with Fred and Jean and hear about the legacy that not only they left in Pennsylvania, but literally around the world. YG, thank you for giving us the opportunity to share the amazing legacy of the Thomas family, the legacy of ministry, not only here, but literally around the world. Could you give a hand to Jean and Peter, Aaron, Grace, and Brandon? One last plug. I guarantee you, if you come up to one of them afterwards, they'll tell you more stories because they are just so passionate about what happened in Kenya. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Chief.
Okay.